All right. We are good to go. It's also being recorded, so you can start. Thank you very much for your patience. I keep admitting people as well. So, thank you.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. My name is Joan. Joan Chinemiram is my name. I'm the medical science liaison for Pharmasymbiosis. I want to believe that in the course of our day-to-day activities, those are working in the hospital, community pharmacy, and all of that, we've met maybe one or two Pharmasymbiosis staff. So yes, so Pharmasymbiosis, we are an African-owned company, and what we do is that we help with, we partner with multinational organizations, the likes of the AstraZeneca, the Novartis, Sanofi, Strides, Jamjum, and what we do for them is mostly we do the demand generation bit of demand generation for these companies, right? We do not handle products. That's it. We're not a distribution company, right? But then we mostly focus on regulation, demand generation for these companies. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen. So I would ask you, Samuel, please let me know when you can see my screen so that I'm sure that everybody is following us. I'll take off my video.
Yes, I can see your screen. And I guess everyone else can also see your screen.
And just to be sure, it's on slideshow, right?
Yes, it's on slideshow currently.
Okay, so thank you. So like I said, Pharmasymbiosis, I work with Pharmasymbiosis as a medical science liaison. And today we'll be talking about the role of phenphoramine and diabetes complications. Just as a background before I actually launch in. So the whole decision today would not just be focused on just phenphoramine, right? It would also try to cut across understanding of what the complications of diabetes mellitus is, and also would also want to talk about what are the molecules, right, that are used in both managing and preventing, right, these diabetic complications. And at the center of these diabetic complications are, nerve damage, right, which is at the center of these diabetic complications. So, we'll just go straight ahead. And talking about diabetes, right, I'm pretty certain that as a pharmacist, right, whether you're in pharmacy school or you're done with school, undergrad, postgrad, whatever, diabetes is something that is mentioned a lot, right, in the course of our curriculum. And also, even when you graduate, you would always meet a patient who has diabetes when you're working in a community pharmacy or in a hospital, wherever, right? So at the core of it all, DM, or I'll say DM for short, right, is a condition, a chronic medical condition whereby the patients have uncontrolled glucose levels, right? Uncontrolled hyperglycemia, right? So uncontrolled hyperglycemia could either be as a result of maybe they're not having sufficient insulin production, right? Or they're already having insulin resistance, right? Which is the major thing that occurs in, diabetes, right? And currently, according to epidemiology, as of 2014, we had about 307 million people across the world who were diagnosed, right, of having diabetes. And there's an expected increase up to 53%, right? That's by 2035, we're expecting that 502 million people would be living with diabetes. And the highest increase in this percentage is expected in the African populace. 1 in 22 adults currently, that's 4 million people across the world, are living with diabetes. And we will talk about the expected increase to about 5 million people by 2045. And 1 in 2 people living with diabetes are actually undiagnosed. And this is why we always encourage, I'm sure at one point in your life as a pharmacist or as a pharmacy student, you've participated in an outreach, in a health outreach, where you're either doing free health checks, right, to help people to catch to help the undiagnosed aspect, undiagnosed category of people, right, to get them into the healthcare system, whereby they are now managed properly for their conditions. And data has shown us that diabetes is responsible for 416,000 deaths, and this was recorded in 2021. And of course, by now we know that this data would have actually, the numbers would actually increased by now. 1 in 8 live births are affected by hypoglycemia in pregnancy. So at the heart of it all, since we're going to be talking about the complication of diabetes, right, it's very important that we note that at the heart of every complication, or both the macrovascular complication of diabetes, we have the nerves being affected. So because the nerves are implicated in diabetes complication, it's good to know what the basic unit of our nerve looks like, and that is the neuron, right? So we have the head, we have the head of the neuron, right? We have the axon. This is the axon, right? This what looks like the stem, right? And then this what looks like the roots is called the nerve ending. Now, very important things to note, because these are things that will be mentioned over and over in the course of this presentation, would be the myelin sheath, the axon, and the nerve ending. So the axon is mostly responsible for being the pathway by which the signals are being, or impulses are being transmitted. We have the node of Ranvier, which is where the impulses jump. So once they get to this point, they jump onto the next part of the myelin sheath. Now, the myelin sheath is what insulates the axon. So if I want to understand that, myelin sheath is very critical when it comes to how impulses are being transmitted along the neuron. And then talking about how impulses are being transmitted, you'd want to know that if impulses are escaping, from the axon because of, let me say, a damage to the myelin sheath, then it could be reported, or it could be felt. The consequence to the body would be what we experience as neuropathy, right? So it's good for us to have these things in mind for the rest of the presentation. So now, talk about the myelin sheath. I told you that how important it is to managing our patients that have neuropathy. So this is what a healthy neuron looks like. So you can see the layers and the layers of myelin sheath surrounding the axon. But in a patient that is having neuropathy, right, we can see that there's a damaged myelin sheath, and you can see that this allows for the axon to be exposed. Now, when impulses are being transferred along the axon, because of it's exposed and it is not properly insulated by the myelin sheath, these impulses are lost. Right, so they can jump to another, let me say, a nearby nerve or nearby neuron that is supposed to transmit signals to the brain for something else. And then all this haphazard signaling is what the patient will now be experiencing. Maybe they're experiencing tingling, they're experiencing numbness, some kind of pain and all of that. They are all the things that form the what we call a neuropathy. So myelin is inflammation on the nerves, and when the myelin sheath starts to thin out or disappear, the nerves shoot out, the signals go astray, and then we experience it as weakness, numbness, pain, and then the prick sensations, needle prick sensations that our patients present with. So demyelination can, of course, a result of a number of things. It's mostly, when we say demyelination, we mean destruction or damage to the myelin sheath. When we say remyelination, we mean repair, right, of the myelin sheath. So you can take place under the following conditions in patients that have uncontrolled diabetes, right, chronic diabetic patients, even from the stage of pre-diabetes. Like, to be honest, even from the stage of pre-diabetes, we can already have these things already happening, right, and causing demyelination of the nerve, right? So drugs like isoniazid, excessive alcohol on itself, by itself, rather it's a toxin. It's a toxin to the neurons, right? We also have sorbitol, which is formed in the polio pathway, which is a pathway that occurs when there's hyperglycemia, right? Sorbitol 2 itself is directly toxic to the myelin sheath. And then we have multiple sclerosis, which is an autoimmune demyelinating disorder, where of course the antibodies see the myelin sheath as foreign and start to attack it, right? So talking about neuropathy, right? So when we have anything that goes wrong with our nervous system, right? It's under the umbrella term of neuropathy. When the nervous system is deranged in any way, we call it neuropathy, right? So as I said before, like when impulses are being transmitted along the axon, and then one is jumping off out of the axon because of maybe the myelin sheath has been impaired or has been damaged, right? There's exposure of the axon, but it leads to haphazard signals being sent to the brain, right, and to the target organ, right, and this causes the functional disturbances that the patient can be experiencing, right? You see that we're having tingling sensation, that's because there's some signal into the brain that something is happening, and then it results, what the patient experiences is the tingling sensation, right? And it also results in, we talked about numbness, right? Abnormal sensations and the absence of stimulation. So there's no stimulation, but the patient is experiencing something because of the impulses that are being generated and sent abnormally to the brain to translate, right? So abnormal sensations are called paresthesia, which I'm sure we're all pretty much aware of. When there is no sensation at all, it's called anesthesia, right? Which is what we put our patients under when we want to actually operate on them. So you can have symptoms of neuropathy as electric light pain, numbness, muscle weakness, sensitivity to touch, tingling, and burning pain. So types of neuropathies that we have mononeuropathies, we have polyneuropathy. So mononeuropathy is basically when the damage to a single nerve. Polyneuropathy is when the damage to many nerves. Mononeuritis multiplex is two or more nerves affected in different parts of the body. Peripheral neuropathy, obviously, any region apart from the brain and the spinal cord, which is mostly our limbs, right, is where when neuropathy is experienced in those regions, it's called peripheral neuropathy. Now, talking about mononeuropathy, right? We have peripheral neuropathy. We have when, as I mentioned, is anywhere apart from the spinal cord and the brain. So the toes, the feet, the legs, the hands, and the arms, right? The limbs are mostly where these feelings, right, are being experienced by the patient. So sensation of tingling, pricking or numbness, pin and needles, sensitivity to touch, right? Those out there, they have hyperalgesia. They have there are lots of algesia terms to it, muscle weakness, pain, burning sensation in hands and feet, or the tell you that their limb feels asleep, right? All these things are symptoms that are experienced by a patient that has peripheral neuropathy. So this is just to show us what it actually looks like. So we know in trying to let's say translate external impulses, we have our sensory and we have our motor fibers, right? So your sensory fibers, they feel the external stimuli. So they feel the external stimuli, they go through the ascending pathway, they tell the brain, oh, this is what we felt. And all this happens in milliseconds, by the way. And then they'll tell the brain, oh, this is what we feel. And let me say it has to do with, let me say, something dangerous, right? The brain then sends back the impulse to the motor fibers, or take the person's hand away, right? So these actions are mostly carried out, these nerves, the peripheral, in the motor nerves and the sensory, motor fibers and sensory fibers are mostly found in the limbs, in the periphery, right? So these motor fibers are directly connected straight to the spinal cord, which now translates this, transfers everything to the brain, and then, messages are sent, and then there's a transmission of the message, and then the person knows the body carries out the action that should be a repercussion for the impulse that's being received, right? So this is the same an example of someone who is touching, let me say, a flame, right, a candle, right? So normal activity, sensory fibers take the impulse, and then motor fibers bring back, oh, remove your hand, there's heat, right, remove your hand, right? Then when it is peripheral neuropathy, there's already a problem in trying to translate information, right? Impulses are being sent haphazardly. So the coordination is no longer there, right, between the motor and then the sensory fibers, right? So this can now result in the symptoms that are experienced. So muscle weakness, the person won't take their hands off as fast as they should, or numbness, you won't even feel that there's actually fire actually burning the person's hand. So for the etiologies of peripheral neuropathy, I already mentioned some of them. Some of them are tied to neuropathy as an umbrella term, right? But for peripheral neuropathy in particular, can have metabolic, medication-induced toxins, infectious origin, right? We can have inflammatory conditions, malignancy, hereditary conditions too, as reasons why or causes, right, of peripheral neuropathy. So for metabolic, diabetes, B12, we'll get to understand why B12 is very important in the origin of neuropathies. Because you know that urea, right, can also be a direct toxin to the nerves. Hypothyroidism too is implicated. Medication-induced, the antiretrovirals, we have antibiotics, antimicrobacterials, amiodarone, and lithium. Toxins, heavy metals, ETOH. ETOH is ethanol hydroxide, right? And that is what we call grain alcohol. And grain alcohol is what you find in your beer, your wine, those things. And one thing I always hope is that alcohol is a direct toxin to your nerves too, right? So yeah, you also want to tread with caution with alcohol, and chemotherapy too being a direct toxin. Infectious origin, hepatitis, syphilis, Lyme disease, leprosy, HIV. So I'll just move on to the next one. So this is what we call autonomic neuropathy, right? Also called visceral neuropathy, right? This is mostly affecting the autonomic nervous system, and we know that the autonomic nervous system are involuntary organs, involuntary parts of the nervous system, right? So it mostly affects the internal organs, so the heart and blood vessels, neuropathy of the digestive system. So the cardiomyopathy would fall under autonomic neuropathy, right? The sex organs, the sweat glands, the eyes too are also affected. Sorry, excuse me. Then we have the sacral plexus neuropathy, which principally affects the hips, the thighs, and the buttocks, right? So mostly the patients will not be able, their symptoms won't allow them to stand as they should. There'll be a lot of weakness in their limbs, especially from the thigh, below the hips, right? The thigh, the hips, and the buttocks. Now, this is the focal neuropathy, where a single nerve is affected. The most common one that comes to our mind will be the retinopathy, because we know that the eye is principally the principal nerve found in the eye, the optic nerve. So it's only one nerve that feeds into the eye. So once it's affected due to any of those etiologies that cause neuropathies, right, is classified as a focal neuropathy. So your eyes, facial muscles, the pelvis, the thighs, and the abdomen will follow the focal neuropathy. So we also want to understand, so we've already mentioned a number of etiologies, right, that result or could be linked to the origin of neuropathies. So we mentioned vitamin B deficiency, injury or pressure on the nerve. We mentioned infectious diseases, right, or infections. We mentioned exposure to toxins, and other risk factors would also be diabetes, like we've already established, alcoholism, repetitive occupational stress, kidney, liver, and thyroid disorders, for which hypothyroidism is implicated. So some of the symptoms, the features, right, of neuropathy, we have the gradual onset of numbness and tingling in the hands and feet, sharp burning pain, sensitivity to touch, lack of coordination, like I already mentioned. We're not talking about the motor and then the sensory fibers, muscle weakness and paralysis if the motor nerves are affected, right? Bowel and bladder disturbances if the autonomic nerves are affected. So how do we now come to, so this patient that has presented and told me this so and so symptoms, right? This is what the patient is actually suffering from, what I should diagnose this patient with, right? So sometimes we do a lot of, for neuropathies, we mostly depend on, apart from clinical features, right? The symptoms and signs that the patient presents with. We can actually carry out a neurological examination, right? There's also one we call the biotensiometer, where it based on vibrations, right? You put the device on the patient's, for example, patient's feet, right? And then ask the patient if they can feel anything. Because it uses vibrations to the vibration is sent when the device is placed on the patient's feet, right, it sends vibrations, to their feet. Now you're expecting them to feel it, but if they can't feel it, the degree to which they can't feel it tells you how bad their neuropathy has actually progressed, right? So for laboratory investigations, this one will mostly be tied to what is causing the neuropathy. So you want to know what is causing the neuropathy. So you want to do your HbA wants to know if the patient has long-standing DM. You want to check for vitamin B deficiency, check if there's a liver impairment, but maybe the body is not able to properly filter out toxins like it normally does, which would also cause the neuropathy that patients could be experiencing. Check for kidney disorders. And then if let me say it's the neuropathy is as a result of let me say trauma to causing nerve damage, or the sciatica, there's a slip stick somewhere along the spinal cord. Imaging would help us to come to a confirmation of our diagnosis that this is what is causing the patient's neuropathy. So for us as pharmacists, right? Yeah, we hear about, people coming to the pharmacy, for those of us that work in the community pharmacy and tell you, oh, I'm experiencing this symptom, right? It's good to appreciate, for us to be able to act fast, right? It's good for us to appreciate why we are saying, okay, when you see a patient that has so symptoms, or even see a patient that has this condition that can predispose them to this is why I should act fast, right? So a prime example, your diabetic patient, right? We all know that in the long course of uncontrolled DM, right?
I can't. I don't think you hear me again. Okay, Dr. Joan, are you there?
Okay, sir, I think.
Okay, you're back. Thank you. Thank you.
Please let me know when you can actually see my screen and slideshow someone.
All right. I can see your screen.
So it's in slideshow, right?
Yeah, no, not yet on slideshow. You're on slideshow now.
All right then. Okay, so I hope it's moving to. So yeah, so I was talking about having a patient who we know presents to our facility with diabetes, and we know at the long run of every diabetic patient, right? If it's not well controlled, there's limb amputation that is waiting somewhere for that patient, right? And we do not want our patients to get to that point where, because imagine the effect of limb amputation on the patient. Their quality of life is greatly reduced. Because their self-esteem, it has psychosocial impacts on the patient, and not just on the patient, on their guardians too, right? So the complications of neuropathy can actually be very much avoided, right? So because of neuropathies, since they can't feel anything, they are prone to infections, like I already said about the diabetic patients. They are prone to injuries, right, because of the reduced sensation, and it reduces their ability to feel pain, heat, and cold. So what are our goals of therapy? So for us, managing DM patients, our goal of therapy is to ensure that we improve our patients' quality of life, which is the overarching goal for everyone who is managing a patient that has neuropathy. We want to improve. Some of them can't sleep, like literally can't sleep because of the symptoms that they are presenting with. So tell you that it affects their sleep. They can't sleep at night. They're having those tingling sensations. There's something is crawling on their bodies, right? They can't sleep. So we want to improve their quality of life. And how can we achieve, improving their quality of life? By symptom control and then preventing new nerve damage. And apart from even these two, preventing new nerve damage, it can actually cause regeneration of the nerves, especially the myelin sheath that has already been damaged, right? Nerves actually have regenerative capacities. Neurons have regenerative capacities, and although it takes as long as 1 month, right, for all the phases of nerve regeneration to take place, it's expected that after that 1 month, a nerve should be able to grow by 1 millimeter, 1 to 3 millimeters per day, right, under the right circumstances. That's giving them the right nutrients that they need, all the things, the cofactors that are needed for that nerve repair and regeneration. So how do we now go about managing our patients? Well, they are not pharmacological, and as always, as pharmacists, one thing we know in pharmacists is that when there's pharmacological therapy, there's always not pharmacological therapy, right? And of course, healthy lifestyle is definitely at the crux of it all, right? You want to make sure that the patients they are eating, balanced diet. You want to make sure that, we already mentioned that ethanol hydroxide brain alcohol toxin to the nerves. We want to make sure that they are limiting or avoiding, if they can avoid, that's the best, right? They're limiting or avoiding alcohol intake totally. The quit smoking. For diabetic patients, we want them to learn how to take proper care of their foot, right? Their feet, both of them anyways. And then how to use hand and foot braces for those that already have very, very long-standing neuropathies and that it has affected their movement and their mobility. For pharmacological, at the foundation, right? If you don't treat what is causing the neuropathy, we are just, we are playing outside the goalpost. You're not hitting the nail on the head. You're not sending the ball straight into the goalpost, right? So you have to treat what is causing it. You have a patient whose origin is diabetes, right? You have to make sure that the patient is euglycemic. That means the patient has proper diabetic, proper glucose control, right? You have to also manage the symptoms that the patient is presenting with, and then correct their vitamin deficiencies. Since remember that I mentioned previously that we mentioned mecobalamin, right? B12, and I said B12 is very crucial, right, to the function of our nerves. We also have to make sure that whatever deficiency might be occurring with the vitamins, they are well corrected. So to manage patients that have neuropathy, right? So there's no there really isn't one way of just doing it. So it's a cocktail of molecules, a cocktail of things that could be used in managing the neuropathic symptoms that our patients present with, right? Of which the vitamins are key, right, in managing these patients. So we have the thiamine, riboflavin, calcium pantothenate, we have the pyridoxine, methylcobalamin, alpha-lipoic acid, benfotiamine, then antioxidants, right? All these things are very critical. And we'll see in the course of this presentation how these things come to play in the pathophysiology of neuropathy as a condition, right? So first we'll talk about methylcobalamin. So I mentioned that methylcobalamin is very, very crucial, so you wonder, how is it crucial? What does it do? And all of that. So methylcobalamin plays a very essential role when it comes to the formation of the myelin sheath. And I remember in the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned what the myelin sheath does, to the nerve, to the neuron, which is the basic unit of the nerve, what the myelin sheath does. So we'll see more about how methylcobalamin actually comes in to help our patient. So methylcobalamin, biologically active form of B12, right? Apart from, some people will call it mecobalamin or methylcobalamin, all is the same, right? Whether you call it methylcobalamin or mecobalamin, they're saying the same thing. And there's so many variants of cobalamin that we will see in the market, or we've learned in school, right? Yeah, but at the crux of it, the active form, the biologically active form is methyl or mecobalamin, right? The one that has the methyl group. And the reason why that is the biological active form is because the methyl group is what is essential, right, to the remethylation or reformation, or let's say remyelination of the myelin sheath of the neuron, right? So it acts as a methyl donor, right, for the synthesis of lecithin. And lecithin is a very important component of the myelin sheath, and it promotes the formation of the myelin sheath, which we've already mentioned. If the myelin sheath is damaged, right, damaged myelin sheath will allow for impulses generated to be sent. There's a haphazard transmission, which now results in the neuropathy that the patient would present with. So mecobalamin is a neurotropic agent and acts as a growth promoter for the nerve cells. And this property regenerates the damaged central and peripheral nervous tissues. So this is how it actually works to help with remyelination, right? So we're taking our food every day. We're taking this, some of us are like meat, right? Whether you're eating meat or eating beans, there's protein somewhere. So you're taking whatever it is you're eating every day as part of your balanced diet. Now the body breaks it down. What it gets when it's digesting protein is methionine. Now, the normal cycle for methionine is that methionine is converted to homocysteine, and this it does through what we call I know if you remember from pharmacy school, you get the SAM pathway, right? That's the S-adenosyl methionine, right? So there is a process whereby it takes away the methyl group, and then you get homocysteine, right? And then this cycle continues. So in presence of homocysteine, because you're also not supposed to get like excessive levels of homocysteine in the body, because remember, excessive levels of homocysteine is tied to cardiomyopathies, to cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, and all of those ACVD risks that we have patients presenting with, right? The body now regulates this. It doesn't want too many levels of homocysteine. So it's either it converts your homocysteine to glutathione, which is an antioxidant, a super antioxidant, right? Either it does that via transsulfuration, or it sends it back to methionine, right? So that the cycle continues, right? I hope you're all good. So in sending it back to methionine, it needs a methyl group, and that is where your the methyl group in your methylcobalamin comes into play. So in the presence of folate and your methylcobalamin, the body is now able to convert the homocysteine, right, back to methionine, and then in the conversion, like the cycle is always ongoing, such that there's a methyl group that goes off here, and there's a methyl group that comes back here. And this methyl group that goes off here is also, apart from being used for homocysteine formation, this methyl group is also very important, right? Because it's also important for the let's say production, right, of lecithin, right, which is important for myelination of our nerves. So this is what we have. So we have, let's say, a summary of what was in the previous slide, so that you can also see how lecithin comes into play. So we have the homocysteine, which is produced, and then it's converted back to methionine. Now methionine, the normal cycle you get your SAM, that's the ester-adenylyl methionine, and there's a methyl moiety that is now cleaved off. Right now, this methyl moiety that is cleaved off is donated to form lecithin, and then lecithin is now used for the regeneration and then protection of the myelin of the neuron, right, by forming the myelin sheath, right. So basically, this is how that pathway comes into play in the management of the symptoms of neuropathy that our patients present with. So methylcobalamin helps in normalizing nerve cell conduction by healing the damaged nerve cells, and that is by causing remyelination of the myelin sheath, right? It restores delayed synaptic transmission. Remember, we said that if there is a damage to the myelin sheath, that means impulses are able to fly off or go to some, or escape the axon, right? Which will cause lack of coordination of the impulses that are being sent, and then wrong transmission. It improves the excitability of the nerve cells, because you see in this case the impulses can no longer travel off, right? And then, the end point of this is that it improves neurotransmission of impulses. So we also have alpha-lipoic acid, which we already mentioned. When I mentioned a list of molecules that come into play in managing a patient that has neuropathy, right? And alpha-lipoic acid we know as, if you work in the community pharmacy, I think that's one very, very common supplement, right, that is being sold, right? So it's a universal antioxidant, and it has lots of good things. Remember that we have from the cysteine pathway, right, from homocysteine to cysteine, we have glutathione, which is also being produced. So you realize that in all the deranged mechanisms that occur due to, for example, in diabetes, right, all the deranged mechanisms, there's an increase in oxidative stress. So oxidative stress is bad for nerve cell function, right? Because at the foundation of it affects the cell itself, and the cell can't survive in very crazy oxidative stress levels, right? So having an antioxidant like alpha-lipoic acid, right, at therapeutic doses is very essential, right, in helping to reduce this oxidative stress and also helping the nerve cell to function optimally. And it has a synergistic action with methylcobalamin. So it offers neuroprotective action, and it's beneficial in managing patients who have polyneuropathy of various tissues, which includes the nerve, the kidney, and the retina. So this is what happens, right? So every human body has alpha-lipoic acid. So other metabolism plays a role in helping in energy production too within the cells, right? So this is just the part about how it helps energy production as an added advantage to its antioxidant activity. So it's an H644 containing compound involved in the metabolism as an antioxidant. We know that it's a universal antioxidant. It utilizes the hydroxy free radicals, hypochlorous singlets. All these are free radicals that can affect the cell, cause cell damage. Like it chelates iron, copper, and transit metals. It protects the cells and the patient itself. Themselves against CVD, protects the beta cells of the pancreas from destruction, has a direct action on glucose transport into the cell, which I will show us briefly, I think at the end of the presentation, how it actually does that, and also help the adipose cells and prevents protein glycosylation. So folic acid, we've already established how folic acid comes into play, right? The fact that it donates methyl group for converting homocysteine back to methionine, which is now very necessary for how it gets the lecithin being produced, is also used for remyelination of the nerves. So folic acid reduces the increased homocysteine levels by converting it to methionine and also reducing the risk of stroke. I already mentioned that homocysteine itself, hyperhomocysteinemia is directly linked, like it's an independent risk factor for CVD, for cerebrovascular diseases. So yeah, we want to also check that in our patients, and it's highly effective in patients that have alcoholic neuropathy. I remember when I was doing my house job, we used to have, when a patient comes in with alcohol withdrawal, right? The patient has maybe is in stupor, literally, right? What we do, we give the B vitamins, and we also give folic acid. All these things to help the patient to help the patient with the symptoms of alcohol withdrawal that they actually present with, right? Folic acid deficiency may also cause peripheral neuropathy, independent of deficiency and in alcoholic patients. Folic acid also improves neurological symptoms in patients with axonal neuropathy and patients with alcoholic peripheral neuropathy. So inositol, which is also another molecule that is important in managing our patients that have neuropathies, right? It has its highest concentration in the brain and the heart, in the lens of the eye. Remember that we also mentioned retinopathy as a very big deal, and as a under the category of focal neuropathy, right? And the form that we see the most is what we call the myo-inositol. It's considered a brain food and works with choline and brain cell nutrition. It's an essential component of the myelin sheath that coats the nerves, as we've already established, and can be used effectively in treating patients that have nerve disorders. Together with choline, it's very essential for the production of lecithin, which we've established over and over again as a building block for the cell membranes that cover the nerves, right? So it helps to improve nerve function in patients with diabetes who experience pain and numbness. And for chromium, it's also a molecule that's also important in regulating glucose metabolism and regulating insulin, right? So definitely in a patient that has DM, right, we would want to make sure that their chromium intake is very sufficient and it is optimal, because it helps in insulin regulation. And we know insulin is highly implicated in the diabetes our patients present with. Now, selenium, just like ALA, right, is an antioxidant, and antioxidants are known for scavenging free radicals, protecting the cell from damage, and then it also has the ability to mimic insulin action and activate proteins in insulin signal cascade, also stimulating glucose uptake. What is the other activities that selenium carries out? So selenium is actually a big boy. So antiplatelet aggregation, anti-inflammatory activity, anti-atherogenic activity due to its antioxidant activity. Deficiency of selenium is also associated with cardiomyopathy, right? And we don't want that. So now coming to the major discussion, right? As you said, they're all important, but metformin is the let's say it's the new boy in town that we really need to get to understand what role it plays and how does it come into the whole conversation about managing a patient with diabetes, right? So that's what we'll be talking about right now. So we'll talk about the consequences of diabetes. So we have the microvascular complications, we have the macrovascular complications, right? All these things are, as I already mentioned, tied somehow to nerve function and nerve damage, right? So our diabetic macrovascular complication, coronary artery disease, diagnosed as a full-blown DM patient, not just pre-diabetic, right? We say that they have the same risk of heart attack as people without diabetes who have already had a previous heart attack, right? And women with diabetes are subject to studying that 300 more often than men with diabetes, right? And often than the counterparts without diabetes of the same age. And people with diabetes are more likely to have, they are twice as more likely, right, to have strokes, right, with diabetes and hypertension. And we know in this climb, diabetes and hypertension are almost like twins, right? They go hand in hand. Once one has diabetes, there's somewhere, someone just look around, that hypertension is somewhere walking around, right? So the most we're able to do for our patients with diabetes. I think the earlier we even start doing that, the better for our patients, right? And for how they view us as healthcare practitioners. So for diabetic retinopathy, I already mentioned that it's a focal neuropathy, right? So the optic nerve is where the issue is mostly originating from, when there's problem with the optic nerve, and then these things can lead to severe vision loss and blindness. And it's worthy to note that, I mean, if you go and visit a clinic, there's this eye clinic somewhere in Ikeja here, right? And if you ask them, out of all the patients that come to visit them, how many of them has DM? Like, the numbers are quite crazy, right? So we don't want to put our patients in that situation where they are experiencing, eye loss and vision loss and all of that. So we have to do our best as early as possible to help them not to get to that point where they are experiencing some form of vision loss regardless. So for is one of the most common causes of adult kidney failure worldwide, right? And eventually, right, when the patient has DM nephropathy, right? They're expecting that at some point they enter end-stage kidney disease, and then they have to candidates for dialysis. So we really do not want our patients to get to that point where this is their fate, right? They deserve better than that. So for neuropathy, we've already established that diabetes can damage the nerves, because from the etiology of peripheral neuropathy, you could see there's a place where diabetes itself has a direct link in causing neuropathy. So the question we might want to ask is, so how does this actually happen? And this is actually through ischemia. So diabetes, hyperglycemia has a direct ischemic effect, right, on the vessels, right, of our patients. So it generally begins as loss of sensation in the toes and the fingers, and then it moves up to the person's legs or arms. So there are so many proposed mechanisms of how vascular damage occurs in hyperglycemia. We have the aldose reductase pathway, we have the reactive oxygen species, which is why we are very particular about, antioxidants in managing patients who have DM. We have the advanced glycation end products theory, we have the protein kinase theory. And so you can see an increase intracellular glucose, right? We have increased sorbitol, and this increased sorbitol alterations in the osmolality of the patient's cells, right? So you can see that there's an alteration in the myoinositol level. There's also its effect on nicotine adenosine diphosphate, which is the NOD that's responsible for redox potential. So oxidative stress, all of those things are, impaired, and then there's altered cell function, and then the complications arise, right? Both through protein kinase activation, altered gene expression, altered enzyme function, complications arise. We have increased advanced glycation end products, right? All these things would also affect the renal system, right? Affect their vascular system, affect the connective tissues, cytokines, and all these things would affect and cause the complications that the patient would present with. So this is just a diagram that just shows us how these, because I mean, when you see all this thing, you want to see how it actually happens, right? So you have glucose entry, there's increase in cellular glucose. You can see that because the NAD, the redox potential is affected, you have lesser glutathione being produced. And in case of lesser glutathione being produced, there's increased singlet oxygen, which causes radical injury to the patient, right? And then when glucose also increases, there is sorbitol, which already establishes a direct toxin, right, to the patient's nerve, right? And then you have also at this pathway, you have glycerides, 3-phosphate, also feeding directly to pyruvate. And you also know that when pyruvate is involved and there's a misalignment, right, it affects energy production in the cell. All this things results in ischemic injury, which is what our patients will eventually experience as diabetic neuropathy. So what is the implication of the aldose reductase pathway in ischemia, right? So when when the cell becomes ischemic, right, glucose uptake is enhanced to compensate energy depletion. However, because the mitochondria is impaired and ATP production is also impaired, right, there's oxygen depletion. Surplus glucose will now enter into the lateral pathway to sorbitol and then phosphatidic acid, which directly affects the nerves. So I'll just spare us all this other English, but we get the fact that excessive glucose hypoglycemia, right, is directly related to ischemic injury, which causes what our patients experience as neuropathy. So this is just what it looks like visually, so that we are able to properly appreciate it. So you can see this is diabetes affecting the nerves, these are the blood vessels. So there's ischemia, right? So when there's ischemia, no blood circulation to the nerves. Now, in terms of no blood circulation to the nerves, you can see that the myelin sheet starts dying out. It starts dying. You can see all this is now chopped, right? So this now causes the exposure of the axon. And then remember, when there's exposure of the axon, impulses are not properly transmitted and it is experienced as neuropathy. So I was going to show us where benfotiamine comes into play. So you can see benfotiamine here, all these plenty pathways I've explained in the previous slides. You can see how benfotiamine comes into play here to prevent these increasing polyols, increase in protein kinase, increase in hexosamine, advanced glycation end products. You can see how alpha-lipoic acid comes into play in the mitochondria to reduce oxidative stress and carbonyl stress. So benfotiamine basically boosts transketolase, right? So in boosting transketolase, right, what it does is that it inhibits these major pathways that are involved in the damage to the nerves. It blocks hyperglycemia-induced activation of this is an inflammatory mediator. It normalizes cell division rates and eventually reduces apoptosis. So in the presence of benfotiamine, when we have more transketolase, glyceraldehyde is what is glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is converted to to ribose rather, which is a harmless sugar. But then if to say there's no benfotiamine, this is what happens, right? You have this glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate being a substrate for advanced glycation end product, for hexosamine pathway, for protein kinase pathway, and we know what these pathways eventually lead to. So benefits of benfotiamine, right, is that for patients with just with diabetes, right, normally they suffer from an increased risk of heart disease. So it plays an important role in protecting their heart health with blood sugar. It helps to through several mechanisms, right? It helps to prevent vascular damage, scar tissue formation, and prevents the inflammation that occurs as a result of the advanced glycation end products, which is the AGEs. And this definitely, in the presence of increased AGEs, right, you have it accelerating the diabetes that the patient presents with. So that is how benfotiamine can act, by preventing these advanced glycated end products from being protecting the patient from the devastating consequences of hyperglycemia that will occur to the patient, right? So basically, benfotiamine helps in boosting transketolase activity, which normalizes the AGE levels. It helps in improving the nerve conduction velocity and vibration perception in patients with neuropathy. It helps in delaying and avoiding hyperfiltration, right? And loss of albumin in the urine, patients that have nephropathy, right? Also useful in patients that have retinopathy, normalizes protein kinase C, and all these factors that are inflammatory mediators that worsen the patient's experience of neuropathy, supports nerve function in patients with diabetes, also has lots of cardiovascular benefits that it provides for the patients. The bottom line is that it's a potential anti-aging agent, which we already established what AGEs are and how they affect our patients' experience, those that have diabetes, right? So benfotiamine would prevent end organ damage in patients with DM, and using it together with other supplemental therapy like the methylcobalamin, the folic acid, inositol, the chromium, the zinc, like I've already mentioned, right? It has been proven in multiple real-world human studies to reduce the AGE formation and also to support tissue function in our patients who have diabetes, right? So I think that brings me to the end of my presentation. At this point, I would let my colleague to introduce himself and introduce what he would be handling. So I'll stop sharing my screen from here.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Joanne Moore. Thank you very much. So, quick one, colon, I can't see him. Okay. Tolua Shefumi, are you there? So that I quickly do the product presentation so that the knowledge will be fully complete. And
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Fantastic. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's been a stretch this morning. Dr. Joanne has taken us to school.
Yes,
what I hope we're able to
taking us to school.
taking us to school, like I felt like I was in like a biochemistry class, with all the pathways.
Yes,
There's a little
actually.
PTSD there, but it's been good. It's been good so far. It's been good so far. So I'm going to be sharing my screen in a little bit. Please just confirm when you get it.
All right, no problem.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, you're on.
So I'm just here to sort of decongest the conversation a little bit into a context that would be tangible for every pharmacist on this call, whether you're in community practice, hospital practice, or whichever sphere of practice that you get to interface with patients and help manage them and give pharmaceutical care. This presentation is for you, right? And thank you for being a part of today's training event. It's been impactful even for me. I know I get to present, but I had to make a lot of notes as Joanne was, speaking. So my name is Shefumi Oladapo, and I am a medical representative. I work with Pharmasymbiosis, and our company, what we do basically is partner with multinationals to help drive their businesses here in the country. So I am the rep for Strides Pharma. It's a multinational with base in India, but we have widespread reach across over 50 countries in the world. And this year for Strides, we are focused on neuropathy, and we just wanted to venture into that space and provide real-time solutions with some of the products we have. And we're excited to have you interface with those products and get to recommend it for your patients. So my topic today will be on the treatment of diabetes-related microvascular complications. Now, with focus on diabetic neuropathy, nephropathy, and retinopathy. Now, my colleague has done a fantastic job in setting the foundation. So I'm not going to dwell on a number of things that she's already talked about. The first slide we have here just talks a little on the prevalence, and I think she had shared that, and I think it's worthy of note that we still have quite a lot of people that are undiagnosed, and I believe our duty really is to do a little more in terms of interfacing and engaging our patients when they walk in. Maybe you see a recurring infection, a recurring vaginal infection. You might just want to ask, okay, when last have you checked your blood sugar level? See, as simple as that intervention might sound, it's saving them, quite a lot of years of pain, because the reason why, we see a lot of diabetic complications is even from undiagnosed patients, aside patients that are not even controlling their, blood sugar level. So, it's just worthy of note. Over 1 in 2 people living with diabetes are still undiagnosed. So this is just a slide that captures, the different complications with diabetes. Um, for me, I mean, when I started, this role, it was interesting to find a lot of these presentations were very frequent because I think from my experience in community, I just, would think it's more of neuropathy, peripheral neuropathy in particular, but there are quite a lot of cases of retinopathy, that walk in, that usually maybe not diagnosed correctly. So diabetes has its impact, the eyes, on the heart. It says people with diabetes are 2 to 3 times more likely to have cardiovascular disease than people without diabetes. I know, and my colleague Joanna mentioned that even the prevalence of end-stage renal disease, ESRD, is up to 10 times higher with people with diabetes. It also says that every 30 seconds, a lower limb or part of a lower limb is lost to amputation somewhere in the world as a consequence of diabetes. So the onus is on us as pharmacists to, be able to make sure that patients don't end up having these complications. And we have the knowledge, we have resources, we have medications that we can use to make sure that these patients don't progress into this stage. Okay, so this is the pathophysiology. We talked about this, the varying mechanisms of vascular damage from hyperglycemia. My colleague had talked extensively on this, and we'll be seeing the implication as we just progress in the slide again. Just as a reminder, oxidative stress is a very common feature with diabetic patients. So it's not out of place to recommend medications that will be effective in managing oxidative stress. Antioxidants can prevent or reverse hyperglycemia-induced nerve dysfunction. And we could see that in the previous slide, and my colleague talked about it, when sorbitol is, generated from the metabolism of glucose and how that, goes into those pathways, alters the redox balance, the, oxidative, reductive agents balance, it causes oxidative stress, and, that leads to nerve dysfunction. So it is not out of place. Antioxidants play an integral role, in reducing neuropathic symptoms or to correct nerve conduction velocity. So these symptoms of diabetic neuropathy, right? We established that neuropathy is a damage to the nervous system. So we have different expressions of diabetic neuropathy. You have the peripheral neuropathy, you have, the retinopathy, you have nephropathy, and all of that. So these are symptoms, typical symptoms you see, at the community pharmacy or hospital level, where a patient starts to complain of a persistent burning or dull pain. I mean, when I get to interface with patients and, they're trying to describe their symptoms, it really takes me back to anytime, and I know this might sound a little crude, but it's just a way for you to know, what a diabetic patient experiences. When you sit on the toilet seat for a very long time and your legs are cramped up in that position, that sensation that happens, after you've been there for a long time. Yes, that's electric shock type of pain, where it seems like blood isn't flowing to the leg. Yes. So that's what a typical diabetic patient that has neuropathy experiences on a regular basis. It's very discomforting. It greatly affects their quality of life. So those are the positive symptoms. You also have negative symptoms: numbness, hypoalgesia, analgesia, hypoesthesia, anesthesia. I had a funny pharmacist, one of the people I interface with and work with at one of the big pharmacies here in Lagos, told me they had a patient walk into the pharmacy without his slippers. Very interesting. This patient is diabetic, right? He walked in with his bare feet, and we're like, okay, so sir, do you know that you say, wear your slippers? And he did not know that he did not have his slippers. Apparently, his slippers were outside, right? The numbness had gone to a point where he could not even detect anything on his legs, and it's that bad. It can get that bad. So these are the presentations, with peripheral neuropathy. You have numbness, loss of sensation, burning and tingling feet, shooting pain and painful cramps, hot and cold sensitivity, foot deformity, impaired balance. Right. So I mean, one of the things we as a company were doing this year across, very various hospitals across the country is what we've termed our diabetic neuropathy detection clinics. So we offer that service and support, to our physicians to help detect patients that are having loss of sensation on their feet and they're diabetic. And I kid you not, the impact has been very, very, very valuable for the patients, because a lot of them walk in, just coming to get their refill. They don't even talk about those symptoms, but by running the test, we use the biotensiometer to run those tests for the patients. We're detecting no, for a lot of them, no, sensation to the vibration from the biotensiometer, even at the highest, vibration level. So it is important what your intervention counts for such patients. And I want that to really, really sit in, because because of the pressure, that this patient, that the pressure on these clinics, doctors want to be as effective with their time with every patient. So they might not get to share. But when they walk into the pharmacy, when they get to pick up the medication at the pharmacy, doing that session of counseling and interfacing with them, you have that ability to detect and make the appropriate intervention for this patient, right? So just to talk a little more on the complications, you have retinopathy, gradually worsening vision, poor night vision, sudden vision loss. These are things that you can actually get to ask these patients, are you experiencing this? Once they come in and they want to get metformin or any of their routine medications to help lower their blood sugars, you can just ask them these questions. Okay, do you experience this? Experience this? So this is what diabetic neuropathy, retinopathy. Okay, yes. So for diabetic nephropathy, I hope you can still see my screen. Okay. So diabetic nephropathy is also one of the complications. Oh, thank you. Right, and it is one of the microvascular complications of diabetes and represents the leading cause of end-stage kidney disease. Right, I think we talked a little on that during the course of the first session. So I won't dwell too much on this. So for management, which is the focus really for us, is there is no cure for diabetic complications really, but prevention and management is very crucial. Treatment is based on three major approaches, and you can see it on the slide: intensive glycemic control and risk factor management, treatment based on pathogenetic mechanisms, and symptomatic management. Now, during the course of the presentations, we've established that dietary supplements, including antioxidants and vitamins, have been suggested as possible treatment options, specifically targeting the underlying molecular pathogenetic pathways, right? So we established that we have these antioxidants, we have vitamins playing critical roles in making sure that these complications don't develop, or even if they're present in the patient, it can be well managed, right? Some of these compounds and supplements include the alpha lipoic acid, talked about that, benfotiamine, which is the bad boy in this conversation, is the core compound that we're talking about today, methylcobalamin also, and folic acid. So I present to you Renerve Plus BT. Yes, so this is one of the medications we've developed, specifically customized for your diabetic patients as they walk into the pharmacy, is coming to the hospital. We have designed this specifically for them. I know that you definitely might be aware of Renerve Plus, right? But we wanted to just customize this specifically for diabetic patients in mind, because we noticed that the presentation of neuropathy for them is a little unique. For other etiologies, as shared earlier by my colleague Joanne, they're varying presentations. It could be from trauma, it could be alcohol induced, it could be, that's for neuropathy now, right? But for diabetic patients, their presentation is unique because the glucose in the body, the hyperglycemic state, tells us that glucose is constantly causing damage. For an accident victim, the trauma has already occurred, and probably there's a surgical intervention and there's that management, and there isn't that continuous assault. But, for a diabetic patient, there is that continuous assault with glucose. So wanted to formulate something that would address all of these presentations, and we would, talk a little on, and we'll talk a bit on each of those strategies that we have. So we have benfotiamine, that derivative of vitamin B1, at 150 milligram. We have methylcobalamin, the wonderful neuroprotecting, a neuro regenerating vitamin, that's B12, at 1,500 micrograms, which is the maximum daily beneficial dose you can get from that vitamin. Folic acid also at 1.5 milligrams, chromium polynicotinate 200 micrograms, alpha lipoic acid 100 milligram, inositol 100 milligram, selenium dioxide 55 micrograms. So all these wonderful compounds packed in one capsule, one gel. They are getting these compounds not even at supplemental doses, but at therapeutic doses. Actually, I'm sure you've noticed that they're a little higher than what you get from your typical supplements, right? So this is what we have: a multi-ingredient formulation to help you effectively manage diabetic complications. So I'll just move on. Arenef plus BT is indicated for adjuvant treatment of diabetic neuropathy, nephropathy, and retinopathy, like we've mentioned, prevention of oxidative stress in high-risk patients and in occupational hazards, and maintenance in convalescence. Our dosage, 1 capsule administered orally once daily. So it's convenient, it's not burdensome. They just need to use it once a day. It's a soft gel, easy to use, has an bitter taste. Very convenient for their use. So this slide just gives a bit of an insight to, the structural comparison between benfotiamine and thiamine itself. And, for us that were the big guns in pharmaceutical chemistry, we can easily appreciate that this compound is very lipid soluble because it's lipophilic. You can see that it has a much longer chain. It's more lipophilic. We can appreciate that, from the structure of benfotiamine. And this has its implication when you compare it with thiamine because it is more lipid soluble compared to thiamine, which is regarded as a water soluble vitamin, right? So because it's more lipid soluble, you expect that it's more, its absorption is higher compared to thiamine. So, for benfotiamine, it's absorbed 5 times more than thiamine. And this impact, tells us, in its bioavailability, you would have more presence of this compound, this form of B1 in the body compared to the conventional thiamine. So benfotiamine, this slide, is the gist of what benfotiamine does. And I know that my colleague has done justice to it. Just to do a little recap, for an hypoglycemic patient, typically, or for a non-diabetic patient, the body just goes through this normal pathway: glucose 6-phosphates, fructose 6-phosphates, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, pyruvate, and becomes L-lactate, and that continues, right? But in an hypoglycemic patient, right, when glucose gets to the stage where it becomes glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, that is a substrate that leads into the various proposed mechanisms of vascular damage that we talked about earlier that end up causing end organ damage. So glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is the key compound in question, right? Now, what benfotiamine does in this pathway is that for an hyperglycemic patient, while glucose tends to become glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate and go into that pathway, right? For a hyperglycemic patient that gets to use benfotiamine, there is a shift towards glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate by the action of transketolase to become a harmless sugar ribose. And benfotiamine goes into that pathway to further enhance the action of transketolase to make sure that glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate doesn't go into that pathway but becomes a harmless sugar ribose. So that's the wonderful thing that the molecule does. So instead of glucose becoming toxic via those pathways by glyceraldehyde, it becomes a harmless sugar ribose, by boosting the action of transketolase enzyme. Now, ribose is a harmless sugar. The body uses it in energy production, in ATP production. It doesn't have any lethal action, on the end organs of the nerves. right? So this is what benfotiamine brings into the picture. And this is why we wanted to add it into the preparation that we have, the Renerve Plus BT, right? So you have a substrate, you have a compound actually that is able to limit the extent of damage by glucose, from glucose metabolism, by converting glucose into a harmless sugar rather than it becoming toxic. So that's what benfotiamine does. So this is just this was derived from one of the studies done for benfotiamine, and we see clinical trials have shown that benfotiamine supports nerve function in diabetics. From this study, benfotiamine users consistently experience significant relief of the diabetic nerve pain, along with an increased ability of the nerves to detect an electrical current, respond to electrical stimulation, and regulate the heartbeat. Now, the import of this is that even whether they come in with positive or negative symptoms, benfotiamine users experience that relief with diabetic nerve pain, and also if they're already experiencing loss of sensation, benfotiamine is able to produce an increased ability of nerves to detect electrical currents, respond to electrical stimulation, and regulate heartbeat. So you have both the positive and the negative symptoms being significantly managed. So alpha lipoic acid, I know we've talked a lot about this. What it does is an antioxidant, kills free radicals, clears out those toxic compounds, toxic radicals from the body. It has direct action on energy transport, prevents protein glycosylation, protects the beta cells of the pancreas, has this neuroprotection activity, right? Alpha lipoic acid from this study, we saw it was a study that estimated the effects of oral supplementation of, ALA, which is what we call it, alpha lipoic acid, contrast sensitivity in patients with type 1 diabetes mellitus and type 2 diabetes mellitus. And I mean, the conclusion from the study is that the oral administration of alpha lipoic acid, the oral administration had an influence on contrast sensitivity in both type 1 and type 2 patients, DM patients. Supplementation with alpha lipoic acid represents an achievable adjunct therapy in prevention of loss of vision in diabetic patients. So this is just an overview, of all of those compounds that you have in your Renerve Plus BT. You have alpha lipoic acid, effective in treating diabetic neuropathy, like we've talked about. I won't dwell on that. Folic acid repairs nervous system injury because of its neurotrophic effects, is very critical to, methylcobalamin's action. And I know we've talked a lot about methylcobalamin, in its effect in repairing the myelin sheath. It's also getting that benefit. The patients will also be getting that benefit when they use Renerve Plus BT, because it is also, in the product. Also, folic acid is important in that process also, in methylcobalamin to be able to repair the myelin sheath, suppresses angiogenesis, inflammation, and oxidative stress. Chromium improves blood sugar metabolism in obese people, reduces oxidative stress, is also a very effective antioxidant, right? Inositol, fantastic compound, in combination with, choline, is necessary for lecithin production also, which is critical for myelin regeneration. So it is essential for cell growth and survival, development and functioning of the peripheral nerves. Selenium, we've said a lot about it, improving nerve regeneration, improves axon diameter, myelin thickness, is a natural antioxidant. And, its other benefits, like how it, it stimulates or is able to have that insulin-like action by allowing glucose uptake within the cell. So, I mean, you have all of this together. You have the alpha lipoic acid, folic acid, chromium, inositol, selenium, methylcobalamin, the most active form of vitamin B12, and benfotiamine, all together in one product. I think the value is immeasurable, to be very honest, and that is what your patients can avail themselves, to. And this is your effective product in managing diabetic neuropathy. So, just in conclusion, I mean, we've talked a lot about, a number of things, how diabetes affects, people, we've talked about, the prevalence and how it is important that we as pharmacists, we're making the necessary interventions. We are actively asking our patients, they call me, they want to buy these medications, vildagliptin, metformin. You're asking them, okay, so what is your experience like? Are you experiencing neuropathy? Are you experiencing, these symptoms? You want to make sure that you're making the necessary, you're asking necessary questions, right? When you see a patient that has recurrent infection, you want to ask them, well, when last have you checked? It could be, it could also be that the patient might be an undiagnosed diabetic patient, and diabetes is associated with serious complications. Yes, diabetes is associated with serious complications such as diabetic neuropathy, nephropathy, retinopathy. These complications can be prevented. So it's not until they have these complications. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this product, because they don't need to have a neuropathy yet, or they can use, Benef plus BT as an insurance, right? That whenever there is a high level of glucose in the body, and I mean, in a hypoglycemic state, right? You want to be able to use a medication that is able, to prevent those complications from developing. We have already talked about how benfotiamine, is able to convert glucose, into a harmless sugar, right? So for every diabetic patient, this is something that they can avail themselves, to use, right? Benef plus BT is your ideal blend of essential neurotropic vitamins and minerals, has all these compounds we've talked about, benfotiamine, able to stop and limit glucose damage by converting it to a harmless sugar so it doesn't end up damaging, the end organs, the nerves. Methylcobalamin is there to actively repair the myelin sheath of the compromised nerves, of the damaged nerves, of the injured nerves. Alpha lipoic acid, excellent antioxidants, has very, very important action in protection of even the beta cells of the pancreas, folic acid, inositol, selenium, excellent antioxidants, and they are helpful in protecting the nerves, right? This blend is what you have in your Benef plus BT and is effective in controlling diabetic neuropathy symptoms, right? So, I mean, that's the gist. That's the conversation we wanted to share, and that's what we wanted to talk about today. I hope you're empowered, at least you have the requisite knowledge, to be able to manage your patients that have diabetic. And even if they don't have, you want to give them something that is able to manage and able to prevent, these diabetic complications from arising. So thank you all for your rapt attention. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm going to hand over to Samuel. Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. That's a very good presentation, super presentation from pharmacist Olua Shefumi and Dr. Joanne. Thank you very much.
Samuel.
Yeah, thank you. So quick one, we move on to questions. So please, if you have any question, do well to signify. I will unmute you, or you unmute yourself, and then you just ask, or do well, or if you don't want to talk, don't want to speak with us, you don't have strength to talk, you want to hear your sweet voice, you can as well put your message, your questions in the chat box. Type a message in the chat box. I will help you read it out, and then you get it answered. Okay, we have the first person, Pharmacist Mukhtar Ahmad has a question. So you can unmute your mic and ask your question, Mukhtar.
All right. Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Yeah, I really appreciate both presenters, and specifically the last one. I appreciate anybody that knows his or her onions. This discussion is well channeled and explicitly clear. So I really appreciate you for that. But I have a couple of questions. Sorry. First, before we come into contact with Renaf Plus, we have Renaf Plus BT, we have Renaf Plus, which was doing absolutely well. But then I think the company feels that there is need to develop another product, which is Renef Plus BT. Okay, so the question is like this. The presenter did say that this new product contains a lot of macro and micronutrients in therapeutic doses. So I want a little clarification, because we all know that these micro and macronutrients have their maximum daily requirement. So at what point do you say this is a therapeutic dose, so to say? So that's the first question. And then the second question I want to ask is something that has to do with the logistics of the entire company. You know, as I said earlier, we had Renal Plus in market for quite some time now. And if I'm to be honest, it's one of the best products we have, because yes, we've seen the efficacy of Renal Plus in practice. But then one of the major issue we have with Renal Plus is its scarcity. You know, Renal Plus can just cease from the market. You look for it anywhere in the world, you will not see it. The rep will not have it. No explanation. Is there any measure set in place with logistics of this Renal Plus BT specifically? So the last part of my question, you know, this Renal Plus BT, you said is specifically designed for diabetic patients to prevent complication in sort of a way. But then, you know, most of these diabetic patients are already on metformin. And we all know that one of the side effects of metformin is that it causes depletion of some nutrients, including B12. So will it be safe on that basis alone? Do you think it will be safe on that basis alone, coupled with the fact that this can prevent the microvascular and whatever complication that might arise later? Will it be safe for one to recommend Renal Plus BT only on these two grounds? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ahmad. Thank you for your questions and comments. Okay, so I'll start with the distinguishing character, or the difference between Renef Plus and Renef Plus BT. So like I said, Renef Plus is what you're most familiar with, you know, but what makes it different from Renef Plus BT that you have on the screen right now is benfotiamine. So the addition of benfotiamine was in a bid to customize, you know, Renef Plus, you know, for diabetic patients, right? So there's still Renef Plus, and there is Renef Plus BT, specifically focused for diabetic patients. Renef Plus still sits well in helping to effectively manage and prevent neuropathy for every other etiology that is not diabetes, right? So you have any neuropathy, any patient that comes in with neuropathy that is not diabetic, maybe it's from an accident or trauma or any of the etiologies that, you know, Dr. Joanne had mentioned in the first presentation, you know, they can use Renef Plus. But if they're diabetic, Renef Plus BT is your recommendation for them, right? And it's because of benfotiamine. And we've talked about what benfotiamine does. Its action, you know, on glucose in an hyperglycemic patient and how it converts that glucose into a harmless sugar ribose, right? So that's the unique thing about this product. Now, the question about the therapeutic dose, you know, what makes, you know, this dosing that we have in this preparation therapeutic or as against supplemental, right? I'm guessing that's the framework of the question that you asked. Now, for the therapeutic dose, you know, that we stated, they are all FDA, they're given by the FDA, right? It's not, we didn't just come up with it. It's already in the FDA guidelines already. So you would find out if you make a bit of a research online and you want to check up on therapeutic dosing for any of these vitamins, you would find it there as against supplemental doses. So the FDA gives a range for every molecule introduced into the market. So it gives you the supplemental to the therapeutic, it gives you that window, that bracket that tells you this is therapeutic and this is supplemental, right? So this is an FDA-driven guideline, right? So, and all of this, the dosing, whether therapeutic or supplemental, they are strictly based on clinical trials. I must add that too. So I think that should answer that question. Then you also asked that, is it safe to recommend BT considering the fact that we know that metformin, depletes vitamin levels, so, is that safe to, be like your basis for recommending? I would say yes. Because aside the depletion also has its impact because the absence of those vitamins, of course, exposes those nerves to further damage, right? So why don't you want to recommend something that would, even aside, replenishing the stores, also goes further to ensure that there is also ongoing repair, within the body. So I think I would, that's an easy yes. This is a good recommendation to, to add as a suitable adjunct for your diabetic patient. Yes. So there was a question about Renef Plus being in the market. Well, Renef Plus never left the market. Renef Plus, never left the market. It's been available. But of course, Strides Pharma came, into a partnership with Pharmasymbiosis to further drive the business, here in Nigeria. And we are, of course, over the last 6 months, working actively to expand the reach. So wherever you are in the country, you can access Renef Plus BT, and one of our other medications, also Preganev, as a combination of pregabalin and methylcobalamin. So, we are in the market, we are going nowhere, we're here for you, we're here to serve you, we're here to provide these drugs that you can use and recommend for your patients, and you comfortably, that your patients are being taken care of, right? So we are going nowhere, we're here to stay where your face is, so don't have any fears like that. So I know that there was a question about, is Renef Plus leaving the market, or is it going to be, no, Renef Plus is not leaving the market. Like we said, if a patient presents to, you, wherever you are, maybe the hospital or the pharmacy, right? And they have neuropathy, once they are not diabetic, Renef Plus still sits well with them. That's what they should keep using. But once they're diabetic, this Renef Plus BT offers more value for them because it contains brensylthiamine, right? So I hope that's been, I've been able to sort of address some of the questions that have been raised. I'll mute now and hand over back to Samuel. And if there are more questions, please, let's go ahead and ask. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for answering that question. Okay, thank you. Okay. I can see a question. I think it was maybe in this presentation. See, the question reads, are there any specific patient population in Nigeria that may benefit from taking Renef Plus BT, such as individuals with diabetes or alcoholism? That's the question. I think it has been answered, but answer it, but just throw more light on it. Thank you very much. Pharmacy safe.
Okay, yes. Okay, so specific patient population in Nigeria that may benefit from taking Renef Plus. Like we said, diabetic patients are the ones we customize Renef Plus BT for, because of these obvious benefits with brensylthiamine, methylcobalamin, folic acid, and the formulation was designed specifically for those diabetic patients. But for any other patients, that may be experiencing neuropathy, perhaps from alcoholism, like you've mentioned, or age-related, or autoimmune, or any of those other causes, accident, trauma, they can benefit from just using Renef Plus. But once they're diabetic, I want it to sit in for everybody, in this room right now, that Renef Plus BT specifically for diabetic patients. It was customized for them, and insurance for them against, having, those complications of diabetes, and also to help manage the complications of diabetes. So Renef Plus BT for your diabetic patients, then Renef Plus alone for any other presentation of neuropathy that is not diabetic. I hope I've been able to answer your question, Ms. Ochiko Newton. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Samuel. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me see if there's any other question. Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much. Let me see if there's any other question. Okay. All right, thank you very much. So far, if you have any other question, do inform us. You can type it in the chat box. I'll take 2 more questions, if any, before we do the announcement, and then call it a day, and then we'll continue tomorrow with the training on communication skill, power pack training, so that you become a communication, I don't know what they call someone who is good in communication. Maybe we'll use the word communication is a very good communicator, obviously. All right. Okay. I can't see any. Okay, let me see. All right. I don't think we have any other question. Hello, can anyone hear me? I want to be sure I'm being heard. Hello?
Very well, we can hear you. I think we should round it.
All right. So thank you very much, Pharmacist Joanne. Thank you very much, Pharmacist Oluwasefumi, for the wonderful presentation. Thank you to Pharmasymbiosis for bringing us this knowledge. Thank you, Pharmasymbiosis, for also bringing us a training on communication skill. Some time ago, we actually had a survey in PSN-YPG trying to understand the preferred communication skill, that the preferred soft skill training that many of us are interested in. And one of the 3 top that made it to the list was communication skills. So we didn't just decided to just have a communication. YPs actually told us they needed communication skill, and Pharmasymbiosis is bringing it to us tomorrow. We start by 10 a.m. tomorrow. It's going to be in 2 sessions. We'll quickly share. I'll send a mail to everybody sharing the review, pre-test, I'll call it that. That's the pre-test for the communication skill. And then we'll just answer it. You answer it, you keep it to yourself. We are not scoring you, but then at the end of the training, you also answer the post-test as well, so that you can compare and see to what extent you've gained a lot. All right, so with that, we've actually come to the end of today's program. I remain my humble self, pharmacist Samuel Greg, the National Secretary, PSN-YPG. Thank you very much all for making it out to be here. The recording is on YouTube. We also share the recording as well, because I know a lot of persons who want, some persons have already started chatting me up on WhatsApp, asking me for the link to the recording. It's on YouTube, and we also share the regular recording as well that we upload on our own Google Drive. Once more, thank you very much all. Do have a nice day. You can unmute and say hi to each other, depending when we leave then. Thank you very much.